when we release an adult from a responsibility as important as the foundation of social justice, as the foundation of a society, and we just say, see ya, you have no more responsibility, you're out, it's all good, you can go find your bliss. You are going to find disaster, you're going to find broken people.
Welcome back. Today we have with us a very special guest. She's someone who dons several hats. She's a wife, mother, grandmother, and an author. Although I must admit that I was extremely surprised to hear that she's a grandmother because she certainly doesn't look it. She's written 4 books, and today we have the privilege of discussing 2 of her books. The first is called Impossible Marriages Redeemed. They Didn't End the Story in the Middle, which is essentially a collection of 50 real-life stories of marriages that look like they were beyond repair, but which did in fact turn around. And 15 more stories of abandoned spouses who still hold out hope for their marriages to be restored. The second book is called Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak, which is a compilation of 70 real-life stories of adult children whose parents divorced. Leila has appeared on several networks, including television, radio, podcasts, and the print media. And she currently lives with her family in Phoenix, Arizona. So welcome to the show, Leila. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I'd like to jump right in so that we can fit in as much as we can. So Leila, I'd like to begin by asking you how you got onto this path of standing for the value of marriage. Because this is not something that we typically see. And we also know that most people who take up causes are those who've normally experienced a certain woundedness in that area. So did you experience the tragedy of divorce personally, or was it something that you saw in your family? And why has this topic become so dear to you?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question because I don't have any divorce in my family. My parents were married for over 50 years before my father passed away. And then my husband and I have been married for 30 years. And so this topic, even though I had, really been very interested in the topic of marriage and family for probably 25 years now, I never really focused too much on the topic of divorce. It just wasn't part of my experience. And then when I was about 50 years old, so that was about 4 years ago now, I started to notice that some of my conversations with one of my closest friends was a little bit different than conversations with other friends, because she had experienced a divorce of her parents when she was about 6 years old. And currently at the time she was probably in her 40s, and she had kids and was in a stable marriage. But I noticed that in our conversations, she would speak of things that were very foreign to me, complications in her life that I had never had in my life, and burdens that she had on her shoulders that I never thought of. And I always knew divorce was, not good, it's bad. But I hadn't really understood the effects, and I hadn't really understood the long-term effects on the children. And so when she would say that, every holiday or every interaction with a stepmother or the step siblings or half siblings and all these different things that became not better throughout the decades, but even more and more complicated throughout the life events and things like that. And then the inability for her to ever be able to talk about it with family members, or explain it or understand it, even with her siblings, it just became more and more complicated. And so I started asking her questions. I'm like, oh, well, what about this and this? And then I told her maybe she should start writing about it, because I certainly, as a 50-year-old woman, I had never really understood this type of pain and this type of burden. And she never got around to writing anything. But then I thought, well, I've got a little bit of a social media presence. I'm going to ask some questions. And I'm just going to say, anyone who's an adult child of divorce, who went through divorce at some point of their parents, would you like to answer these questions? And I just threw out 8 questions off the top of my head. And I never expected what I would get in return. And I got what I call an avalanche of pain. And many people couldn't even answer these very simple questions. They were just too emotionally distraught. And no one had ever asked them about this ever. And so most of them thought they were the only ones who went through this type of pain, and they thought there was something terribly wrong with them. So that was the basis for the Primal Loss book. I kind of compiled their answers, men, women, all different types of life experiences, and good divorce, bad divorce. I mean, the whole thing. And the answers were so similar. So that really opened my eyes. And then when I would hear their personal stories and meet them in person, and it hasn't stopped for 4 years. I mean, I keep getting emails and people contact me. When I realized that how much pain is out there, and that we just really have a society of walking wounded that I never knew about, that I couldn't close my eyes to it anymore. I had to keep working in this topic so that we could bring awareness to it.
So, Leila, you mentioned your book, Primal Loss, and the fact that you put out 8 questions out there. And I just wanted to bring up a story from the book, which is essentially in response to one of those 8 questions as to whether adult children of divorce are resilient. And this is how the story goes. Open quote, "Maybe we think that parents being happy will make kids happy, but when divorce occurs, someone does the leaving. It is not usually a congenial mutual decision. My mother cried her eyes out when my father left her, and she tried to maintain that huge secret of not letting the world know that he had walked out. Happy? My dad might have been happy, but nobody else was. Same when he left my stepmother, she was destroyed and my siblings were destroyed. Did we pull ourselves back together? I guess reasonably so, but I have had nightmares almost my entire life. I have suffered from migraines since I was 9 years old, and as an adult, I have been diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, panic attacks, and severe clinical depression. The divorce essentially removed a protective parent from my life, and I was abused from age 3 until I was 18. That plays into my emotional dynamics. I behaved like the perfect child, easily subdued and intimidated. All of that damage was exacerbated when my own husband left me." Close quote. So this is just one of the stories, but the underlying theme is pretty much the same, which is a loss of trust, a loss of confidence, lack of faith, poor self-worth, and very often sexual promiscuity. So if you can expand on the effects of divorce, and in your experience, why is divorce still touted as the panacea for marital problems? Why is it that people still, ask people to move on when they encounter problems? So if you can just explain that.
Sure. So to the first part, the damage is really even unknown to a child. Like if a child is going through a parental divorce, all the adults in the child's life is saying, this is good. This is for the best. The teachers are saying it. The parents are saying it. The therapists are saying it. Everybody's kind of like, this is fine. This is fine. It's all going to be good because the adults are going to be happy. The fact that family is the foundation of who we are. I mean, it's everything. Marriage it actually exists as an institution in order to safely bring children into the world, raise them up in a stable environment, keep the adults in a stable relationship where they're productive in society and accountable to each other and others. But these children, every child has a mother and a father, and they are supposed to be brought into the world, into this stable environment. And that is their identity. That's what they know. It is very primal to be with a mother and a father and have that safety and that identity. So when that is blown to bits, when the foundation is just completely shattered, and it's always against the child's will, I mean, they have no say in it. There is a deeply psychic, spiritual wound there that cannot really be just talked away. Hey, no big deal. It's nothing. Everybody's going to be happy. The child doesn't understand why they feel so terrible if everyone is telling them it's great. And so they might start cutting or abuse, self-abuse, or acting out in terrible ways, and um, being pleasers, and having to act one way with one half of the family and then another way with the other side of the family. And you can't speak about one side with the other side. So you start to kind of split who you are, and you don't really know who you are anymore. And there's a lot of anxiety involved. And all these things snowball over the years. And then the adults say, what's wrong with this kid? Why is this child acting out and becoming promiscuous, or gaining a lot of weight, or having an eating disorder, or doing all these terrible things? And if it's a teenage boy or something, becoming so angry, so violent, we don't understand what's wrong with this child. And they never connect it to the fact that the child's identity and family was shattered at the foundation. In the case of a divorce where there was an abandoned spouse, this is also incredibly painful for the child, because you have the abandoned spouse who didn't want the divorce, basically almost sometimes suicidal. I mean, that life has been shattered for that person. So that person is trying to keep it together, barely surviving on his or her own, can't really take care of the kids because they're dealing with divorce court and all these different things that are happening with the divorce and the separation and the animosity, probably a lot of animosity for the person who wants to leave and not be bothered anymore. And the child then has to almost caretake the very wounded parent who's barely surviving, and now if it's a woman, might have to go out and work or do things that were not planned originally. It's a horrible position to put children into, and they do suffer for it. And those scars are not just going to go away. And they do learn not to trust, and they do learn, conflict leads to permanent separation, and nothing is stable, nothing is sure. Relationships, they don't understand how to navigate a conflict when all they've seen is that it blows up and people go away. And if you're too unlovable, you'll be tossed aside forever. So they come into their marriages like that, and no one ever really connects it to what are we doing with divorce? Why is this considered the panacea when in fact it's quite the opposite? It is breeding a society full of insecure, broken, wounded folks, at their very foundation. So it isn't a panacea. The reason people think it could be, I think, is because of personal comfort of the adults. When an adult encounters a difficult suffering, what have we been told, in the last few decades is, this idea of sacrifice is just kind of gone. Now it's, well, whatever I feel, if I don't feel comfortable, and especially because marriage has gone from being, this objectively good institution for society, for the common good, for the people involved to get through tough times and to sacrifice for the love of others. Now, and to bring up children in a stable environment. Now we think of marriage as romance. And so if the feelings aren't there, if I'm not feeling romantic, if I don't get that, special emotional feeling from this person who isn't fulfilling all my needs and my emotional needs, my physical needs, I've got to go, because that's not what marriage is. We've bought this lie, marriage is about romance, and you can't sustain that. No marriage is always going to feel romantic. And many marriages are rough. But that's where we are. So even society, every show, every movie, everything is feel good. And if you don't feel good, there must be something terribly wrong. And so therefore you need to move along. And in doing so, we shatter society itself at the foundation.
So this brings me to my next question. And I think you kind of alluded to this, the fact that marriage and love are purely looked at from the perspective of romance. And it was Dostoevsky, the well-known Russian novelist and philosopher, who said, love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared with love in dreams. So Leila, if you can, share with the audience as to what the sexual revolution did to shortchange us regarding our perspective on true, authentic love and the role of sacrifice or suffering in order to attain it.
When the sexual revolution came, we said, yeah, this is what we're going to do. No matter what, I have this right. I have this right to be sexually happy. That's it. And if I'm not, it doesn't matter what anybody else needs or wants. This is my right now. And society came along for whatever reason and said, yeah, I think you do have that right. Everybody has that right. And so therefore, any vow, like, it used to be a sacred vow you take for life with your spouse, that was sacred. I mean, nobody would mess with that. And we still take those vows, but we don't mean them, because we know that if I'm not happy, and if this guy's not doing it for me anymore, and that girl, I don't know, she gained weight or whatever, I'm out. And so the self-centeredness and the selfishness of that took all the sacrifice that we used to see as beautiful, as a wonderful thing. Like my wife gets sick, let's say I'm a husband and my wife gets sick, and she can't be that wonderful young spry thing that she was for me at the beginning. I will care for her. I will take care of her, until one of us dies. That's how it's going to be. And that vow always meant something. And now it's meaningless. It's meaningless because we only want what makes us feel good. And suffering always had meaning before. And now it's just something we're supposed to get rid of immediately. You're not supposed to suffer. Why would anyone suffer for someone else, especially if it's on the romance level? And so sadly, we don't think of that in any other way. I mean, we suffer for our work, we suffer for our career, we suffer for, if we're going to be an Olympic athlete, we suffer for our children, everything, but we won't suffer for our marriage and for our family. So it's nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. And the fruit of it is rotten. It's awful. And if we really look at it, we'll know that it is. And people actually do later regret what they've done. Like at the end of their life, they look back and they see the shattering of their family and even their extended family, their children, their grandchildren, generations, they see it. And it's very hard to face. And so we don't really want to talk about it. But it's there. And so to the extent that we reject sacrifice and we reject suffering, we are going to get more suffering and more sacrifice on the back end. So.
And so I wanted to bring up your book, Impossible Marriages Redeemed. Philip Lawler, who wrote the foreword for your book, had this to say: "This is a book full of heroes. What is a hero if not someone who makes sacrifices for another? In this book, we have the testimony of people who have sacrificed their comfort and their pride to save their marriages for the sake of their spouses and children." I have to say that these words were truly like a balm for my heart, because as someone who stood for my marriage, not only have I never felt like a hero, on the other hand, I've been mocked and ridiculed for standing for my marriage. And so my question to you is, why is it that abandoned spouses are treated in such a manner, more often than not by their own family, friends, society, and even the church, with such contempt? So if you can speak to that.
Yeah, this is very painful because the suffering of an abandoned spouse, someone who says, I'm going to keep my vow, I'm going to have integrity, I'm going to keep a sacred promise that I made, because it's more important. It's a transcendent thing. I'm going to do this at great cost to my own self, my own feelings. It doesn't feel good to be alone. It doesn't feel good to be abandoned. So we see abandoned spouses, and we, as a society, we think we don't want to watch other people suffer. We don't like it. We don't like it. We don't like it, because it also means we might have to suffer someday too. So if we're friends and family, there really is this, well, we really don't want this person to suffer because we love this person and we want them to find a happy marriage and a happy spouse. There's another chance. Everyone gets a second chance. We get more chances. So we really do, as family and friends, there might be a really good intention behind this push to want someone to break their own vow. Because again, when you make a vow, you're making it, you're not saying, I vow this, I make this sacred promise, but only if you do it too, or only if you make sure that you're going to follow up, and it's conditional on how you act. No, when you make a lifelong vow, promise, a sacred promise. You mean it for life. And but it's, again, as family and friends, we may want to just usher that person out of suffering. We can't take it. So it's more about us. Like we don't want to see someone in pain that we love. I think it's an indictment on people's consciences. They would never ever agree to suffer in that way. Again, back to the sexual revolution, we get to have what we want. How dare someone tweak our conscience and make us feel bad because that person is standing for their marriage and their vow, and they are suffering and they are alone, and we turn our face to that. But those are the people we want. Really, we don't even maybe realize those are the people we need, are the ones who will do the uncommon thing and not be just going with whatever makes people happy. And so you really are a hero. I mean, to stand when no one else will, isn't that kind of who our heroes are? I mean, we know it somewhere inside. So, but it feels terrible. It feels terrible. And to not have that support when those are the people who are supposed to get the support of the community, it seems like a double injustice that's happening there. But it's a beautiful thing for those who can see that sacrifice is such a grace. It's just so meaningful if it's done in love. That is something that many people who are quiet, they will see it, and they just, again, they look around like nobody else is saying it, but in their hearts they see it, and it's a very beautiful thing. So I want to thank you personally, because I find that the standers, the ones that I know who have stood for their marriages, are the most amazing people. And I admire them so much more than I admire, just the people running around chasing their own pleasure and happiness in the moment. I don't find that admirable. So thank you for taking the hard stand. It's not popular, and yet that's what we want. That's what we want in our people. That's what we want in our children. We want them to learn that. So I'm really, really just, my hat's off to you for doing that, and I thank you for it.
So there is no denying the fact that divorce infringes upon the rights of people, whether it be the abandoned spouse or children, and often both. So it goes against the very grain of social justice. And yet divorce is relegated to the private sphere. And most people don't want to intervene because they consider it to be a personal issue. Yet, what is often spoken about are the rights of the spouse who wants to move on. Because we know it's the spouse who's found a new love interest who initiates divorce proceedings, who pretty much manipulates the judiciary, family, friends, social networks, and so on to gain sympathy and support. So if you can speak to this.
Right. I love how you said social justice, because there is a core of social, which is society, and that is the family. I mean, there is no social justice without the family being the very core and center and foundation of that. That is the first society, is the family. So where that goes crazy and where that is broken with no impunity, and everybody says, oh, it's great, yeah, go find your happiness, that is the epitome of the lack of social justice. There's no justice there. So if we don't start with the family, it's nowhere. There is no social justice outside of that. The courts here in America, it is the only court case, no-fault divorce here is the only court case where the person who wants to keep the contract will lose every single time, 100% of the time. It is the person who wants to break the legal contract that will win 100% of the time. And so the innocent party who doesn't want to break the contract always loses financially. They lose their home. Usually they lose custody of their kids half the time. They lose, it's an unjust system. It's actually evil. It's an evil system because there is no justice when One person can unilaterally break the agreed upon contract. You can't get out of a car lease or a home, you can't get out of any contract whatsoever, an employment contract in court. You'll be the one that loses if you're trying to get out of this contract, right? That was agreed to by both parties. Exactly the opposite in marriage, in divorce cases. It is stunning to me. I never even thought of that before getting into this. I never thought of the evil of a predetermined judicial system, that's predetermined unilaterally, always on behalf of the person who wants to break the contract. These people who are leaving with, unjustly leaving, abandoning their spouses, they are saying that they have rights, but they are not taking along with their rights, their responsibilities, because you cannot have a right without a responsibility as an adult. These kids, they have a right, just a natural right to have a mom and a dad. But an adult has a right and a responsibility. And so when we release an adult from a responsibility as important as the foundation of social justice, as the foundation of a society, and we just say, see ya, you have no more responsibility, you're out, it's all good, you can go find your bliss, you are going to find disaster. You're going to find broken people. Everyone who has been touched by divorce is the lesser for it. There is a brokenness and a woundedness in every one of those people, including the abandoner, quite frankly. There is no way that someone abandons their responsibilities and their family and isn't affected by it to his or her core. There's a problem. That person is always going to have to assuage his guilt, deal with the conscience coming up. And I've watched that. And they want nothing more. The abandoner wants nothing more than, because they already have the society saying, you're fine, you're good, you did keep doing this. But there's the conscience, and the conscience oftentimes is the spouse who is still keeping her vow or his vow. And that is haunting. It's haunting. There's no question about it. They've succeeded, an abandoner succeeds in getting the courts to agree, getting society to agree, getting popular opinion to agree, getting maybe the family and friends, or maybe all the family and friends to agree. But one thing they'll never have with someone who has the integrity to stand for that sacred vow is they'll never have that last bit of peace that says, "Oh, I didn't do anything wrong here. I'm totally fine. I'm scot-free. I'm in the clear." No, not as long as one person lived both rights and responsibilities. And those are called, to me, those are called grown-ups, right? Those are adults. And so there's just so few of them anymore. So people can talk about rights and talk about moving on and finding their happiness, but you wouldn't do that in any other area. And this is actually the most important area. So it's a kind of a pipe dream that they're going to go and find their happiness, because there is no happiness built on the destruction of others and the destruction of families.
So Leila, my final question to you is, what can we do to change the narrative, to put the brakes on this destructive cycle? You mentioned time and over again that family is the building block of society. And when families are torn apart, it has repercussions on society. Even someone like myself who lives in India, which is supposedly a lot more conservative, the evidence is clear. Divorces are skyrocketing, and no one seems to even bat an eyelid anymore. So what can each one of us do to bring about a change?
So when you have friends who are struggling in their marriage, one thing you can do is you can be that one voice among the ones who say, you got to be happy, you don't have to put up with this. And you can listen and you can help, but you have to be that, and you should, obviously we should do that always, but you have to be that one voice that says, okay, let's take divorce off the table. Let's just say That's not an option. Now what do we do? Be that voice that doesn't encourage the exit, the moving on. And then there's hope. As long as you still have one voice saying, I stand for the marriage. I love you. I love him. I was at the wedding. A lot of people, we don't realize, if you're at the wedding, you're there as a witness to what was happening, this vow. And so when things go rough, which they always will, when things go bad, and I don't know a single couple in the world who hasn't at some point along the line thought, why did I marry this person? I don't like this person. I want out. Okay. The only difference between those people and people who get divorced is that they don't divorce. That's the only difference. And they get through it. They get through it to the other side. So if you can be that voice for your friends and family to say, I will stand for the marriage. I love you. I'm going to stand for this marriage, and we're going to figure out something that we can do to help. And then I know there's not a whole lot of help, unfortunately, out there for saving marriages, but there still is. And you're going to do everything to help them find that, to help that person find a way to stay in that marriage. So that's the voice, the one little voice. That's all a lot of couples need, is just one voice of hope, and that will not cave in to the culture. You're in India. My books, are, sometimes it's hard to get them, out to wherever in the world, but I have the PDF free for anyone who wants either of those books. That's why I kept them away from publishers. I just wanted to make sure anybody could have that. So if people were to go to leilamiller.net, so it's Leila Miller.net /primal loss PDF, or also /impossible marriages redeemed PDF. You can read the entire book, both those books. What I would suggest is, because we don't know how badly divorce hurts the entire fabric of society, because of millions of desperately wounded human beings who are struggling so badly, read the words in Primal Loss. Read the words. I have told people, you need to read it with a glass of wine and a box of tissues, because you're going to be so moved and horrified, really traumatized. People can't even get through that book a lot of times. And again, I don't want people to lose hope, but they have to see what divorce does, because these kids aren't telling their parents. They're not telling their friends. Most of them didn't know anybody else felt this way. They're anonymous in the book because they don't want to hurt their parents. They lie to their parents about how well they're doing. They lie to their spouses. They lie to everyone. And again, they thought they were the only ones. That's why they don't speak. So they're speaking for the first time. I had someone do a book club with Primal Loss, and they said that the people in the book club said it was the most traumatic book they've ever read. It is something that is so devastating that once you read a little bit of it, and again, these are just answers to 8 simple questions. Once you read it, you will never see divorce the same way again, and you will understand why culture is falling apart. So that's what I would suggest, is kind of that will inoculate you against thinking divorce is no big deal and everybody can be happy. You will now never be able to, I can never go back. I mean, the last 4 years has been so eye-opening, and it is, I will never speak in a cavalier manner about divorce again. So that's what I would recommend, those several things.
Thank you so much, Leila. I wanted to take the time to thank you personally for the kind of work that you're doing. Your books made such a difference to me, because as I was mentioning, as someone who stood for my marriage, I've often been mocked and ridiculed. In fact, I guess I've typically received one of 3 responses. The first is, what you've spoken about, the fact that, people will pretty much walk up to you and say, listen, this is not worth it, move on, you deserve to be happy. And who's to say that the next man cannot give you the happiness that you deserve? And the second is a bit more condescending. And it goes something like this: poor you, I think you're emotionally entangled with your husband. So, I feel sorry for you. And the third is a bit more of a scathing attack. It's not always in words, but the undertones are pretty much, oh gosh, this seems like such, almost like masochistic behavior. You seem to derive pleasure from your pain. What's wrong with you? I mean, why would you suffer when you have a choice not to? What I find perplexing is that people will never clarify why you're standing, whether this is a decision that's been deliberated upon, whether you've prayed about it. or they will not pause to ask themselves because it's often misconstrued to be an emotional decision. And I can tell you from personal experience, this is not an emotional decision. It cannot be. It is the most rational choice that you can make. And I've had to dig deeper. I've literally had to die to myself in order to reach this point. And for me, I think, it was a family member who supported me in this decision. And ironically, it was someone who was in fact divorced. And your books helped me enormously because it helped me feel a certain sense of solidarity, because this can be an extremely isolating journey. And through those pages I felt a certain sense of comfort and consolation, because I knew there were so many like me who were suffering and who have suffered and have crossed over to the other side, or who are still suffering because of the choice that they've made. And so thank you so much. And you mentioned at the very outset that this is not something that you chose because of anything that happened to you at a personal level, but this was something that was placed on your heart and that you've just chosen to be very faithful. And so I pray that you may continue to be faithful. I know this may not be easy because we live in such a pro-divorce culture, but I hope and pray that you will continue to march on and know that your work makes a difference. And I'm testament to that fact, because I live in a different continent, and yet your work has impacted me so enormously. So thank you so much, Leila, and I hope and pray that you will be faithful to your calling. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Benita. I appreciate it so much. And I do feel solidarity because this is human nature. This is, across continents and it isn't easy work, but I admire the people that I talk to like you so much that it gives me such hope for mankind. Like, it's just, the people are good people. There are people who are willing to do the right thing at whatever cost, to themselves. And so I really thank you. You guys are the inspiration for me because, I have never known stronger people. And so I get my inspiration and my strength from all of you. So thank you so much for what you're doing, Benita. I appreciate it.